Welcome to 28storms.com. This is your Wednesday afternoon tropical weather update for this June 29th, and we have a lot to cover, including Tropical Storm Arlene as it continues to intensify as it nears Mexico. Here are some of the official stats from the National Hurricane Center as of the 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time advisory. Maximum sustained winds have increased to near 50 miles per hour, and the movement is now off toward the west. Keep in mind that this has been moving generally off toward the west-northwest. We're beginning to see more of a turn toward the left, and now that brings some additional confidence to the idea that the center will make landfall either over or just to the very south of Tampico, Mexico. But again, don't get caught up with too much of where the exact center is going to make landfall, as the effects will be nearly the same tens of miles away from the center, with gusty winds and a lot of heavy rainfall. Now, interestingly enough, the official forecast earlier this morning was calling for a peak intensity of 50 knots, which is moderate tropical storm status. However, due to the increasing organization of Arlene on the latest satellite imagery and observations from the hurricane hunters, it now looks as if a run toward a strong tropical storm may be in the cards, and thus the reason why they don't feel fully comfortable with ruling out the possibility of Arlene becoming a minimal Category 1, and therefore hurricane watches have been issued for much of the coastline. And the now forecast intensity, or the peak intensity, is expected to be 70 miles per hour, and as you may or may not know, it takes 74 mile per hour sustained winds for anything to be considered a minimal Category 1 hurricane, so not that far off. We are now less than 24 hours away from landfall, therefore this is going to become more of a nowcasting system instead of having to rely heavily on model guidance, and as you can see, the models are really all in agreement with a landfall near or just south of Tampico within the next day. Interestingly enough, if you take a look at some of the latest intensity model guidance, you will notice that none of the forecast models bring Arlene up to 60 knots or a 65 knot minimal Category 1 hurricane. The only model that does so is the ship model, but you have to keep in mind that this particular version of this does not incorporate land interaction. The one that does is the D-ship, and obviously that model is not nearly as aggressive, and the model is not intensifying Arlene to a minimal hurricane before it makes landfall. But I do like the National Hurricane Center's idea to forecast a max intensity closer to 60 knots, despite what the model guidance is showing, due to the most recent trends in satellite imagery. We can see that the favorable upper-level ridging is now well established over much of the southwest Gulf of Mexico, and that can also be seen on the color representation. These very dark blue colors denote areas of less than 5 to 10 knots of wind shear, so now a very favorable environment, and as you can see, the storm is located directly underneath that ridge. This was a mid-morning microwave satellite pass, and we usually get these every few hours, and every single time we get a new update with Tropical Storm Arlene, some of the banding features and the inner core of the storm look a little bit better, so there's no reason to think that this storm will continue to intensify. This is another microwave view of the storm. This is the mimic imagery from the Sims website, and this animation runs all the way through mid-morning, and you can see at the very end of the frame the inner core of the low-level circulation is really beginning to tighten. This is a very different picture compared to yesterday afternoon. We now have convection completely surrounding the low-level circulation in all quadrants. In addition, the outflow, both the equatorward and outflow channel, appear to be very healthy. And if it weren't for the fact that this were more of a broad and large tropical cyclone, I would be a bit more concerned about the aspects or probabilities of rapid intensification right before landfall. Typically you don't see that unless the inner core is very small and tight, and thus that allows it to organize a bit more quickly. It takes a bit more time for these large tropical cyclones to really come together, but nonetheless this storm is well on its way to becoming a moderate to strong tropical storm, and you have to give much credit to the ECMWF model, because that model has been by far the most aggressive dynamical model that we've had over the last 4 days, taking this down to sub 998 millibars. And we're not quite there yet, but I'm sure we will end up below 998 before this system makes landfall. And this is the more regional water vapor imagery, and as you can see, that upper level ridge is well in place. That outflow is looking good in all quadrants. There is some limitation or restriction here as we inch closer to Brownsville, Texas, but as long as the upper level winds remain relatively light, I really do not foresee any of that dry air being entrained into the low level center. Once again, this is just another zoomed in visible image to show you just how organized Tropical Storm Arlene is becoming. and it's really no wonder that the National Hurricane Center has issued hurricane watches. At this point, we really cannot rule out the possibility of a weak minimal 75 mile per hour Category 1. Now, unfortunately, I'll still have to reiterate myself so that this does not sound like any hype. The conditions will remain the same despite any slight increase in the winds compared to what we expected just 24 hours ago. A Category 1 will not do significant wind damage, although you should be preparing for at least some very strong winds right along the coastline. You don't want to be caught completely off guard, but nonetheless, by far the heaviest threat will be the heavy rainfall, especially in the mountainous terrain. In terms of South Texas weather impacts, the storm will still indirectly cause some influence in your weather. As you can see, the Brownsville National Weather Service has gone ahead and issued a small craft advisory, a coastal flood watch, a rip current statement, and a special weather statement. So overall, they advise swimmers to really stay away from wandering too far out into the open waters. Obviously, it can get somewhat rough with this tropical cyclone passing just to the south. And also the tides will be a couple feet higher than normal, thus the reason why there is a threat for some immediate coastal flooding, especially near South Padre Island. And then in terms of the rainfall, we're not expecting a major threat. The HPC expects no more than about 1 to 2 inches immediately near the Mexican-U.S. line, within upwards of 9 inches just toward the south. And the Brownsville National Weather Service office is in fair agreement with that. They're expecting about 2 to 4 inches at the most, with 3 to 5 in extreme isolated cases. The 72-hour GFS accumulated precipitation forecast expects no more than 1 to 2 inches immediately near the border, while the latest 12Z NAM forecast solution brings an excess of 2 to 3 inches of rainfall. And I think the slightly more aggressive rainfall idea here for southern Texas is the more likely solution. Some of the outer rain bands of Tropical Storm Arlene will be impacting Brownsville, Harlingen, and surrounding areas as early this afternoon. So I really do like the idea that maybe closer to 2 to 3 inches will be more than likely. We are all clear in the remainder of the tropics. There is nothing that really stands out on satellite. And I went ahead and took a look at all the dynamical model guidance for the next 7 days, and none of the models show an organizing tropical disturbance. So it looks like we will have at least a few days of a break after Tropical Storm Arlene makes it out of the picture. Although I do think that the month of July will be average to slightly above average out here in the Atlantic Basin. And once this storm completely moves out of the picture, I'll go ahead and begin to explain some other severe or seasonal weather parameters as we get more time to do so. So that is your update for this afternoon. Be sure to check out 28storms.com for the latest satellite imagery, model guidance, and other official information from the National Hurricane Center. It's all right there on the front page of the website now that we have an active named storm. Also, don't forget to check us out on Twitter and Facebook for more frequent messages, and we'll have another full video update by tomorrow afternoon.